On November 14, 2008, at around 4 p.m., the boat Santa Marta left the port of Pirapora in northern Minas Gerais with 7 men on board. They would do what they did every week: go down the São Francisco River to the Buritizeiro area, fish during the night, and return the next day with the boat loaded. The wife of the boat's captain, Dona Iracema Botelho Reis, stood still on the riverbank until the vessel disappeared around the bend. She later said that she waved, but that her husband didn't see her. The Santa Marta was a 12-meter wooden boat with a diesel engine and a hull painted blue and white. It had been renovated 2 months earlier. He carried fuel for the round trip, a fishing net, a longline, a styrofoam cooler with ice, and provisions for 2 days. The crew consisted of experienced fishermen, men between 34 and 61 years old, all born and raised on the banks of the old São Francisco River. They knew every sandbank, every backwater, every stretch where the current tightened. None of them were newcomers. None of them had a reason not to return. The boat didn't return on Saturday. It didn't return on Sunday. On Monday, when the family of Arlindo Mendes da Cruz, the oldest member of the crew, went to the River Port Authority to register their concern, the officer on duty asked them to remain calm. He said that delays for fishermen were common, that the engine might have malfunctioned, and that they might have stopped on an island to wait for the weather to improve. The weather that week was clear, it hadn't rained, and the river was flowing gently. The official search only began on Wednesday and lasted 11 days. They traveled 140 kilometers downstream. They didn't find the boat, they didn't find any wreckage, and they didn't find a life jacket, an oar, or a can of sardines floating in the water. Nothing. 7 men and a 12-meter boat disappeared in the largest river entirely within Brazil, as if they had never existed. 15 years later, in March 2023, a group of cowboys herding cattle along the left bank of the São Francisco River, near the municipality of Bom Jesus da Lapa, in western Bahia, more than 600 kilometers from Pirapora, spotted the hull of a boat stranded in a dead arm of the river, half covered by floodplain vegetation. The grass had grown all around. The roots of a fig tree were beginning to encircle the bow. It looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. When the cowboys climbed aboard, they found something that none of them could explain. The table on the aft deck was set. There were aluminum plates arranged in a circle and cutlery beside them, an enameled coffee pot in the center, and plastic cups turned upside down, as if someone had arranged everything for a meal that never happened. There were no bodies, no signs of a struggle, no blood. The personal belongings of the 7 fishermen, sandals, shirts, a wallet with documents, a portable radio with corroded batteries, were arranged as if their owners had stepped out for a moment and were about to return. The name on the hull, faded but legible, reads Santa Marta. The registration number corresponded to the boat that disappeared in Pirapora 15 years earlier. The São Francisco River originates in the Serra da Canastra mountain range in Minas Gerais and flows for over 2,700 kilometers until it empties into the Atlantic Ocean, between Sergipe and Alagoas. It is the river of national integration, the river of the riverbank dwellers, of the rowers, of one of the figureheads on the prows, and of the stories that the riverside people tell at night, when the wind stops and the water turns dark. It is also the river where people disappear, where boats sink without explanation, where the silence of the backlands meets the immensity of a sheet of water that, in certain stretches, opens up like a lake without visible banks. The 7 men from Santa Marta were not adventurers. They were workers, men who supported their families with what the river provided, men who left at dawn and returned with their hands smelling of fish and mud, men whose names didn't appear in the major newspapers, whose families waited in silence, first with hope, then with fear, then with something nameless. That thing that remains when hope is gone, but certainty never arrives. And this is the story of the disappearance of the Santa Marta boat and the 7 fishermen from Pirapora, of what the river took, of what the families did, of what the police didn't find, and of what appeared 15 years later in a forgotten river branch with the table set for dinner. From here, the story progresses slowly. Every detail matters. Every name has a family behind it. What happens when 7 men disappear and the river returns nothing? Neither a body nor an explanation. How far will a woman go who rejects the word widow? Because he has never seen proof of what everyone else has already accepted. What does it mean to find a boat intact with the table set? 15 years later, there's still no sign of who was on board. We are in Pirapora, northern Minas Gerais, in November 2008. The river flows slowly at this time of year. The temperature has already exceeded 35 degrees. The aluminum canoes gleam on the riverbank. The fishermen know the São Francisco River like the back of their own backyard. And nobody on that Friday afternoon imagined that 7 of them wouldn't be coming back. Sebastião Botelho Reis was 52 years old and was the captain of the boat. On the riverbank, everyone called him Tiao the Sailor, a nickname he received from his father and grandfather, both of whom were boatmen by profession. His family had been fishing in the São Francisco River for 3 generations. Tiao knew the river like few others. He knew where the bottom was rocky, where it was soft sand, where the current changed its mood without warning. He had large, calloused hands, suntanned skin, and a quiet way of speaking that made other men obey without him needing to raise his voice. That Friday in November, he climbed onto the Santa Marta building with the same ease as someone climbing onto their own balcony. He was wearing a faded blue shirt, denim shorts, and a straw hat that his wife kept asking him to change. He carried a simple flip phone in his shorts pocket, which he almost never used because there was no signal on the river anyway. Alongside Tiao boarded Arlindo Mendez da Cruz, 61, the most senior member of the crew. Seu Arlindo had already traveled the São Francisco River from Pirapora to Juazeiro in Bahia, back when steamboats still operated the commercial route. He knew the old river, the river before the dams, and spoke of it with a reverence that younger people sometimes mistook for superstition. He had been a widower for 8 years and lived with his daughter-in-law, Dona Conceição, and 2 young grandchildren in a brick house in the Santos Dumont neighborhood, 4 blocks from the river. He had osteoarthritis in his knees and back pain, but he never turned down a fishing trip. He said that the day he stopped going to the river was the day he would finally die. He carried with him a thermos of coffee, a rosary in his pocket, and a pocket knife with a bone handle that his father had given him when he was 12 years old. The third was Geraldo Soares dos Anjos, the youngest of the group, at 34 years old. Geraldo was Tiao's son-in-law. He had married the master's eldest daughter, a young woman named Lucia, and had been part of the crew for 6 years. He was a strong man with broad shoulders who worked as a bricklayer during the week and fished on weekends to supplement his income. She had 2 young children, one 4 years old and the other 2 years old. The woman later recounted that on the morning of that Friday, Geraldo woke up earlier than usual, had coffee standing in the kitchen, and spent some time watching the boys sleep before leaving. I didn't say anything special. He didn't say goodbye in any different way. He just stood there, staring, and then left. The other 4 were Nivaldo Pereira Gomes, 47 years old, diesel engine mechanic and responsible for the maintenance of the Santa Marta.
Arivaldo Cardoso de Souza, 43, who had worked as Tiao's assistant for over a decade and was known by the river as Valdo Calado, because he hardly ever spoke. Jose Antonio da Silva, 38, nicknamed Zé Piranha, because of a scar on the index finger of his left hand, the result of a piranha bite when he was 15 years old. And Ademir Ferreira Lopes, 41, father of 4, who that week was filling in for another fisherman who had fallen ill. Ademir almost didn't go. His wife, Mrs. Marlene, later said that he had a bad case of the flu on Thursday and that she had asked him to stay home. Ademir said he needed to go because his weekly income depended on that fishing trip. He drank some lemon tea with honey, put on a jacket over his t-shirt, and left home before lunch. Dona Marlene stood at the door and said, "Goodbye, may God be with you." He answered without turning around, "Come back soon." 7 men, 7 stories, 7 families who remained on the riverbank, watching the river carry away what was most important to them. None of them were rich. None of them had any known enemies. None of them had a reason to run away, to hide, to disappear. They were ordinary men, but the kind that the whole of Brazil knows. The neighbor who wakes up early, takes the crowded bus or the canoe in the dark, returns dirty and tired, and sits on his doorstep at the end of the day to drink a beer and watch the sun go down. They were invisible to the world, but to those who remained, they were everything. The port of Pirapora, in November 2008, was not an organized dock with numbered berths. It was a dirt embankment on the right bank of the São Francisco River, with tree trunks stuck in the mud serving as moorings, and a cracked concrete ramp down which the larger boats descended into the water. It smelled of dried fish, diesel oil, and that thick humidity that rises from the river in the late afternoon, when the sun begins to set behind the Buriti palm groves. The Santa Marta had been docked there since the morning, not while the men were loading the equipment and checking the engine one last time. Pirapora, at that time, was a town of just over 50,000 inhabitants, squeezed between the mountains and the river, living off small-scale commerce, fishing, and the timid tourism that appeared during the holiday period. The Marshal Hermes Bridge connected the city to Buritizeiro, on the other side of the São Francisco River, and at night, when traffic stopped, you could hear the sound of the water hitting the concrete pillars. It was a city where everyone knew each other, where news traveled faster than any car, where the river was not just scenery but sustenance, a path, and for many, a destination. That Friday, the sky was clear and the heat was intense from early morning. The thermometer at the pharmacy in Piazza Meloviana read 37 degrees at 2 p.m. 2 men arrived at the port throughout the day, each at their own pace. Tiao was the first, around 11 in the morning. He rode his bicycle down the street by the port, leaned his bicycle against a lamppost, and began to inspect the boat. He checked the engine oil level, tested the bilge pump, tied the nets on deck, and arranged the styrofoam boxes in the bow. Her lovely heir arrived soon after, brought by the eldest grandson on a motorcycle. Nivaldo arrived on foot carrying a toolbox and a gallon of spare diesel fuel. The others arrived throughout the afternoon, each bringing their own contribution: flour, salt, coffee, brown sugar, and a bottle of cachaça that Zé Piranha hid under a tarp. Between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, while waiting for the heat to subside a bit, the men sat in the shade of a mango tree near the ravine. They smoked and talked to you about the river level, about the fishing spots, about the price of surubim catfish at the Montes Claros market. Mr. Arlindo told a story about an alligator he had seen the previous week near Jatoba Island. Tien listened silently, checking the weather forecast on the portable radio he always carried. The forecast predicted stable weather for the next 3 days with no rain or strong winds, ideal conditions for fishing. Around 4 p.m., Tiao gave the signal. The men climbed aboard. The Santa Marta's diesel engine sputtered twice before starting, releasing a cloud of black smoke that mixed with the warm air from the shore. Nivaldo adjusted the rotation. Tiao took the helm. The boat moved away from the riverbank slowly, cutting through the muddy water in a straight line towards the center of the river. Dona Iracema stood on the riverbank with one hand on her hip and the other raised. He waved until the boat turned at the bend down below, where the river makes a wide turn before heading north. The last thing she saw was her husband's straw hat, its outline silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Then the river was empty. 2 other women were on the embankment at that time: Dona Marlene, Adamir's wife, who had come to bring an extra coat because she knew her husband had the flu, and a neighbor, Dona Teresa, who had gone down to buy fresh fish from another boat that was arriving. The 3 of them stayed there chatting for a few minutes after the Santa Marta disappeared from sight. Dona Teresa commented that the river was beautiful, calm, and good for fishing. Dona Iracema agreed. Mrs. Marlene said she hoped Adamir's flu wouldn't get worse. Then each went to her home, to her routine, to her own piece of shared life, which at that moment was still intact. The boat went down the river during the afternoon and into the night. No one knows exactly what time he arrived at his planned fishing spot, probably near Ilha do Retiro, a stretch known to fishermen from Pirapora, about 30 kilometers downstream, where the São Francisco River widens and forms deep backwaters, good for catfish and dorado. That was where Tião used to anchor. It was there that the men set up their nets, lit the stove, and waited for the night to pass, listening to the sounds of the water and the animals on the riverbank. It was there that, in theory, everything should have happened as it always did. But something didn't happen as usual, and nobody knows what. On Saturday morning, Dona Iracema woke up at 5 o'clock, as she always did. Mo put the water on to boil, removed the dust from the cloth strainer, and stood still in the kitchen, looking out the back window that overlooked the yard and, further away, the dark strip of the river. Tião was supposed to arrive by noon. She had already set aside the large basin for washing the fish and left the peeled garlic in the sink. The boat did not appear at noon. Not at 2 in the afternoon either. Iracema didn't call anyone. I knew that delays on the river were something that happened. But when the sun set and the sky turned red over Pirapora, she sat in the plastic chair in the backyard and stayed there in silence until it got completely dark. Sunday dawned the same. Coffee brewed in a cloth filter, back window, river flowing indifferently below. Iracema went to the port mid-morning and asked the other fishermen if anyone had any news of the Santa Marta. And nobody had one. A boatman named Tonho Verdura, who had gone out fishing on Friday night and returned on Saturday morning, said that he had not crossed paths with Tião's boat at any time. I hadn't seen any boat lights in the area around Ilha do Retiro, and I hadn't heard any engines. Iracema returned home, with a tightness in her chest that she later described as a beast that sits in her stomach and won't leave. That night, for the first time in 32 years of marriage, she slept with the kitchen light on and the front door unlocked. On Monday morning, Dona Conceição, daughter-in-law of Seu Arlindo, left home at 7 o'clock and went straight to the river captaincy. Conceição was a practical woman, with a firm voice and dry eyes. She had raised her 2 children from her first marriage alone, before getting together with her father, Arlindo's son. Ali knew that waiting without doing anything was the same as accepting the worst. He took his father-in-law's documents, a photo, and the boat's registration number, which he had written down on a piece of paper. That same morning, Mrs. Marlene went to the police station to report Adamir's disappearance. Dona Lucia, Tião's daughter and Geraldo's wife, tried to call her father's cell phone 16 times between Saturday and Monday. All calls went to voicemail. Despair didn't come all at once. It came gradually, like water rising up the bank when the river floods at night, silently, without warning, but steadily. Each passing hour without news was another hour of silence that weighed heavily on those women's hearts. Every boat that appeared around the bend in the river that wasn't the Santa Marta was a small repeated death. And each phone call that rang and didn't carry the voices of husbands, fathers, or in-laws was a silent confirmation that something had gone wrong. And the worst part was that nobody knew what it was. There was no storm to blame, no visible accident, nothing, just the river flowing as it always did, carrying water, carrying time, carrying away what remained of hope. The river captaincy of Pirapora operated in a small room on the second floor of a commercial building on Avenida Governador Magalhães Pinto. There were 2 civilian employees and 1 Navy officer who worked in shifts. The room had a formica table, an old computer, a laminated map of San Francisco pinned to the wall with tacks, and a ceiling fan that made more noise than wind. When Mrs. Conceição arrived there on Monday morning with her father-in-law's marriage certificate and a 3x4 photo taken at a studio in Pirapora, the attendant asked her to fill out a form and wait. Conceição filled everything out with small, meticulous handwriting. He handed it over and asked when they were going to start looking.
The official said he would forward the report to the Navy base in Belo Horizonte. and that the instruction was to wait a reasonable amount of time before initiating a formal search. Conceição asked what a reasonable time frame was. The employee said it depended. Conceição asked, "Depends on what?" The employee didn't know the answer. On Tuesday, the families gathered at Dona Iracema's house. The wives of the 7 fishermen were there, along with some of their children, Nivaldo's brother-in-law, and the pastor of the church that Dona Marlene attended. The meeting had no agenda and no coordination. And that's what happens when desperate people gather in the same room. Each person spoke about what they felt, what she thought, what she was afraid to say out loud. Dona Lucia cried from beginning to end. Dona Marlene prayed silently. Dona Iracema listened to everyone, and then said, in a voice that sounded more tired than angry, that the next day she would go to the police station, to the town hall, and even to the fire station if necessary. That she wasn't going to stand around waiting for an answer. That nobody wanted to give. The official search was authorized on Wednesday, November 19th, 5 days after the departure from Santa Marta. The Riverine Authority mobilized a patrol boat and 2 support boats. The Pirapora Fire Department dispatched a team of 4 men. The military police provided 2 soldiers. This operation was coordinated by a Navy sergeant who had experience in river searches in the Pantanal, but who had never worked on the São Francisco River. The search area was defined as the stretch between Pirapora and the city of São Francisco, 140 kilometers downstream, which was the estimated maximum range for the fuel that the Santa Marta was carrying. The search operation traveled down the São Francisco River by speedboat, motorboat, and in some stretches by canoe with outboard motors. They traveled 140 kilometers in 11 days, stopping at each riverside community, each inhabited ravine, each island where fishermen used to camp. They spoke with riverbank dwellers in São Romão, with smallholders in Manga, and with a group of charcoal makers who worked on a farm on the left bank, near Januaria. Nobody had seen the Santa Marta, and nobody had heard an engine at night. No one had found anything floating. The river runs wide and slow in that stretch, with visibility of more than 1 kilometer on a clear day. A 12-meter boat, painted blue and white, is not something that goes unnoticed. The firefighters dove into 3 spots where the river forms deep pools. Sections where the current erodes the seabed and where, in theory, a boat could have sunk without leaving a trace on the surface. Visibility underwater was almost zero. At that time of year, the water of the São Francisco River carried mud sediment that reduced visibility to less than 1 meter. The divers descended to a depth of 12 meters and found nothing. No hull, no engine, no wreckage, no bodies. The riverbed was mud and rock, nothing else. Over the course of the 11-day search, half the team visited 32 riverside communities and interviewed more than 150 people. Fishermen, boatmen, farmers, housewives, children playing on the riverbank. The answer was always the same. I didn't see it. I didn't hear it. I don't know. In a stretch of the river near the city of Manga, an old fisherman named Joaquim Tapera told the search team that on Friday night he had heard a strange noise coming from the river. Something between a loud crack and a dry thunderclap, which lasted a few seconds and then stopped. They asked what time it was. He said he didn't know, that he didn't have a watch, but that it was after midnight, because the rooster had already crowed once. They asked which direction the sound was coming from. He pointed to the middle of the river and said, "From there, in the darkness." Joaquim Tapera's testimony was noted in the search report, but it did not lead to any conclusions. No one else heard the noise. There was no evidence of an explosion, a collision, or any event that could have produced that sound. The report recorded the information as an isolated and unconfirmed account. On the 11th day, the sergeant in charge of the operation gathered the team on the riverbank, near São Francisco, and announced the end of the active search. Resources were running low, fuel was dwindling, the men were exhausted, and the river had given nothing back. The final report from the Riverine Captaincy, dated November 30th, 2008, recorded the disappearance of the vessel Santa Marta and its 7 crew members as an accident with no determined cause and no victims or wreckage located.
The last line of the report stated, "The searches are concluded as of this date, and the case is available for reopening should new information emerge."
It would take 15 years for a new fact to emerge. The police report was filed at the Pirapora Civil Police Station, under a number that would remain etched in the memory of at least 3 of the families involved. The lead investigator, a middle-aged man named Dr. Valmir, listened to Mrs. Iracema for 40 minutes, writing everything down on stacks of paper with a blue pen. She listened to Donna Conceição, who was more direct and harsher in her responses. He listened to Arivaldo's eldest son, Reginaldo, who was 19 years old and worked as a bricklayer's assistant, and who entered the room with red eyes and trembling hands, but who spoke with a clarity that surprised even the police chief. He wrote down the names, ages, physical descriptions, the clothes they were probably wearing, and asked for photos. He forwarded the official letter to the IML, Institute of Legal Medicine, of Montes Claros, and to the Port Authority, and said with a frankness that hurt more than any silence, that without a body and without a vessel, the investigation would be limited. Limited. The word echoed in the police station room as if it had bounced off the walls and bounced back. Dona Iracema did not answer. Donna Conceição took a deep breath and asked if limited meant they weren't going to do anything. The delegate explained patiently and without cynicism that the civil police did not have the structure for river searches, that this work was the responsibility of the Port Authority and the fire department, that the police station could investigate criminal hypotheses, kidnapping, robbery, homicide, but that for this it needed evidence, clues, something concrete. And there was nothing concrete. There wasn't even a single piece of wood floating. And the investigation was opened as a case of missing persons. There were 3 lines of investigation: river accident with shipwreck, criminal action by third parties, and voluntary disappearance. The third hypothesis was quickly discarded. 7 men with established families, no serious debts, no criminal record, and no apparent reason to take on this responsibility together. The second hypothesis was investigated only superficially. The police interviewed some informants about piracy activity in Rio, but found no direct connection to the case. The initial hypothesis, shipwreck, remained the most likely, but without material evidence it was impossible to confirm it. In March 2009, 4 months after the disappearance, the Public Prosecutor's Office of Minas Gerais requested information on the progress of the investigation. The police station responded that there were no new facts. The Public Prosecutor's Office recommended keeping the investigation open, but in practice, the case stalled. The documents were stored in a brown paper folder on a steel shelf in the archives room of the Pirapora police station, among hundreds of other files that nobody consulted. The families received the news of the case being closed via a simple letter, delivered by mail, without any further explanation. Donna Iracema read the paper twice, folded it carefully, and put it away in a drawer of the bedroom dresser, along with the marriage certificate, Tiao's documents, and a photo of the 2 of them taken on their 30th wedding anniversary. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't tear the paper. She just put it away and closed the drawer. Conceição went to the police station the next day and asked to speak to the police chief. He wasn't there. She left a note at the reception desk that read, "We'll keep searching with or without you." And they searched. After the first year, life in Pirapora continued for everyone else, except for the families of the 7. The city didn't stop. The river didn't dry up. The boats kept going back and forth, but 7 houses remained different. Donna Iracema didn't change the lock on the front door because Tiao carried the key in his pocket, and she was afraid that if he came back, he wouldn't be able to get in. Geraldo Soares dos Anjos' wife, Donna Lucia, Tiao's daughter, started working as a cleaner in 3 houses to support her 2 children. She never asked for a survivor's pension because she never accepted that her husband had died. To apply for a pension, I needed a death certificate. To obtain the certificate, one needed a body or a court declaration of presumed death. Lucia refused to file the request.
He told the family that doing that was the same as killing Geraldo with their own hands. Donna Marlene, Adamir's wife, was the one who suffered the most with the bureaucratic aspects. I needed the money. She had 4 children between the ages of 6 and 14. The oldest, a boy named Velison, dropped out of school to work in a mechanic shop in downtown Pirapora and help out at home.
Mrs. Marlene tried to apply for a survivor's pension through the INSS, Brazilian National Social Security Institute, but the process stalled because there was no death certificate. The employee at the INSS, Brazilian National Social Security Institute, office in Pirapora, explained kindly, but without providing a solution, that without the declaration of presumed death, the system would not release the benefit. Marlene had to hire a lawyer from the public defender's office to file the lawsuit. The request took 3 years to be judged. For 3 years, she did laundry for other people, cleaned houses, sold cakes in jars outside her children's school, and slept only 4 hours a night. Nivaldo's wife, Rosangela, had a different fate. 6 months after her disappearance, she left Pirapora with her 3 children and went to live with a sister in Montes Claros. He couldn't stand being in the city. She said she couldn't look at the river without feeling like it was going to return her husband at any moment, and that this waiting was destroying her inside. In Montes Claros, he found a job at a bakery and restarted his life as much as possible, when a part of his life was trapped in a river 150 kilometers away. Erivaldo's and Zé Piranha's wives remained in Pirapora. They continued living in the same houses, attending the same church and shopping at the same corner store. From time to time, they would meet on the street and exchange a look that said more than any conversation, a look of those who share something that no one on the outside understands, the texture of living with an absence that has no form, no date, no birth certificate. Iracema was the one that resisted the most. She continued living alone in the house in the São Sebastião neighborhood, keeping everything as Tiao had left it. His bicycle remained leaning against the same spot. The fishing tools were hung up in the back shed. He had 2 straw hats as a spare. It was left on the nail behind the bedroom door. Iracema washed the house every Saturday, as she always did. She cooked for 1 person but still put 2 plates on the table out of habit. Sometimes at night he would go to the backyard, sit in the plastic chair and look towards the river without seeing anything, because between the house and the bank there were entire blocks of houses. But she still looked, as if waiting were a job, as if the act of waiting itself kept something alive. The absence of the 7 men shaped the lives of those who remained in a silent and permanent way. There were no major news reports on television, nothing of national importance. The case appeared in regional newspapers for a week or 2 and then disappeared, like so many stories about ordinary people in small towns in the Brazilian countryside. The names of the 7 fishermen of Pirapora have never been mentioned on a national television news program. Their photos never appeared on a big screen, and their families were never interviewed by a reporter in a suit. All that remained was silence and the river. Over time, the rumors grew throughout the riverside communities, like weeds growing along the water's edge. Slowly, but surely. Some said that the Santa Marta had been boarded by river pirates, groups that assaulted cargo vessels in the stretch between Januaria and Carina. Others said that the 7 had been involved in transporting illicit goods and that things had gone wrong. Some said the boat had hit a submerged log and sunk during the night without anyone having time to scream. And there were also the older stories, those that the riverside people tell in hushed tones, gazing at the river, about the water spirit, about boats that disappear on full moon nights, and about the São Francisco River reclaiming what is rightfully its own. The piracy hypothesis was not absurd. In the middle stretch of the São Francisco River, between northern Minas Gerais and western Bahia, there were frequent reports of attacks on boats in the 2000s. Cargo boats transporting supplies to isolated communities were boarded by armed groups in speedboats, usually at night in stretches where the river was wide and the banks uninhabited. The robbers took everything: diesel, food, engines, and sometimes they assaulted the crew. In some cases, there were deaths. The federal police investigated a river piracy network on the São Francisco River in 2006, but the operation resulted in few arrests and the activity continued in a scattered manner. For the families of the seven, the piracy hypothesis was simultaneously the most frightening and the most acceptable. Terrifying because it involved violence, suffering, and death. Acceptable because it provided an explanation, a cause, someone responsible, something against which the anger and pain had been directed. But there was no proof. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. None of the informants mentioned Santa Marta. None of the items from the boat have been found for sale in the region's black markets. The hypothesis of drug involvement emerged in a more insidious way. It started as a casual comment in a bar in Pirapora, made by someone no one was later able to identify. The story grew that Tião had debts, that the boat made trips that weren't just for fishing, that the seven of them were transporting merchandise for someone in January. None of that had any basis. The police investigated and found no connection. None of the seven families ever showed signs of income disparity. Maptião lived in a simple house. Geraldo was a bricklayer. Ademir lived from odd job to odd job. The accusation was cruel and unfounded, the kind that arises when people need an explanation and can't find a clean one. It's easier to accept that someone meddled where they shouldn't have than to accept that the world is a place where seven men can simply disappear for no reason. Dona Iracema knew about it and didn't say anything publicly, but later told a neighbor that it hurt more than the disappearance itself. He said they could say whatever they wanted about the river, the wind, bad luck, the will of God. But saying that her husband was a criminal was something she couldn't accept, and if she had to choose between never knowing what happened and accepting a lie, she preferred never to know. The years went by. The river continued to flow. The seasons repeated themselves. Drought, rain, and with them, the level of the São Francisco River rose and fell, covering and uncovering sandbanks, islands, submerged tree trunks, secrets. The children of the missing fishermen have grown up. The older ones got married. Some had children. Vicent, Ademir's eldest son, became a mechanic and opened a small workshop on the outskirts of Pirapora, on the road to Montes Claros. Geraldo's two children were raised by Dona Lucia with the help of Dona Iracema. The oldest, named Sebastião in honor of his grandfather, joined the merchant navy at the age of 18. When his mother asked him why he wanted to work in Rio, he replied, "Because the river owes me an answer." In 2012, the Public Defender's Office obtained a declaration of presumed death for 6 of the 7 missing persons. Dona Lucia was the only one who didn't sign. Geraldo was kept listed as missing in the system. The declaration of presumed death allowed the other families to finally access pensions, insurance, where applicable, and resolve previously stalled property issues. According to the state, 6 of the 7 men were officially dead. For the families, none of them were there. Mr. Arlindo would have turned 75 in 2022. His daughter-in-law, Mrs. Conceição, held a mass at the neighborhood church and lit 7 candles, 1 for each man of Santa Marta. After mass, she went to the riverbank and stood there for 20 minutes looking at the water. He didn't throw flowers, he didn't pray aloud, he just stood there like someone visiting a place that is both a tomb and a source of doubt, in Pirapora over time. And the story of the 7 fishermen became one of those stories that everyone knows, but nobody talks about, unless asked. Children born after 2008 heard about Santa Marta like they heard about hauntings, something distant, half real, half legend. The adults knew it was true, but they avoided the subject around their families. The river flowed on, immense and indifferent as always. In March 2023, 3 cowboys from the Boa Sorte farm in the municipality of Bom Jesus de Lapa, western Bahia, were walking along the left bank of the São Francisco River, herding a herd of Nelora cattle that needed to cross a flooded lowland area. The oldest of the 3, a man named Valdomiro Pereira, was the first to spot the hull among the vegetation. He thought it was an abandoned fishing boat, a common sight in that area. But when he got closer, he realized the boat was intact. The hull had no holes, the engine was in place, and on the aft deck, protected by a plastic tarp that time had discolored but not torn off, there was a table set up. Valdemiro was 58 years old and had worked with cattle since he was 14. He knew that stretch of the river like the back of his hand. He later said that he had passed by there dozens of times over the years and had never seen that boat before. That didn't mean the boat wasn't there. The floodplain vegetation along the São Francisco River is dense and changes shape with the floods. But this meant that if the boat had been there for a long time, it was well hidden. The three cowboys carefully climbed aboard. The deck was covered with dry leaves, thin twigs, and a layer of green slime that indicated prolonged exposure to moisture. Further down, beneath the plastic tarp, on the aft deck, things were preserved in a way that none of the three could explain. There were 7 aluminum plates arranged in a circle on a wooden board that served as a table. Next to each plate, a fork and a spoon. In the center, a green enameled coffee pot with its lid fitted. Around the teapot, 7 plastic cups were turned upside down, the way any housewife in the countryside would arrange glasses to keep dust out. It was as if someone had prepared everything for a meal and then disappeared. Valdemiro opened the bully. It was empty. The plates were empty. There was no food, no leftovers, nothing to indicate that the meal had been served and the table was set, but no one had eaten. On the rest of the ship, the discoveries were equally disconcerting. In the bow cabin, where the fishermen used to keep their belongings, there were plastic bags neatly organized. Inside each bag, folded clothes, shirts, shorts, flip-flops. One of the bags contained a leather wallet with documents in the name of Nivaldo Pereira Gomez, with his ID and CPF numbers legible, despite their age. Another bag contained a portable radio with batteries corroded by acid. There was also a pair of eyeglasses, a nylon bag with hooks and lines, and a spiral notebook with notes on fishing spots. Island names, depths, and dates written in tiny handwriting that the mold hadn't completely erased. The diesel engine was in place with the propeller partially buried in the mud, and the fuel tank was empty. The fishing nets were rolled up on the deck, dry and hardened, more intact than ever. The styrofoam box used to store the fish was in the bow, open, empty, and clean inside. There were no impact marks on the hull, no signs of fire, no holes, cracks, or deformations that would suggest a collision or violent grounding. The boat appeared to have been carefully parked there, anchored in a shallow spot where the water barely covered the bottom, and then abandoned. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle, no gunshot wounds, stab wounds, or any kind of violence, and above all there were no bodies, neither inside the boat, nor nearby, nor in the surrounding water. The 7 men had simply vanished, leaving behind everything they were carrying: clothes, documents, tools, and food prepared to be served, as if they had all gotten up from the table at the same time and walked into the river. Valdemiro called the farm owner from a landline. The farm owner called the police station in Bom Jesus de Lapa. The police station contacted the civil police in Salvador. In less than 48 hours, the dead arm of the river where the Santa Marta was stranded became the scene of an investigation. The Bahia Civil Police isolated the boat and called in forensic experts from Salvador. Identifying the vessel took less than a week. The registration number in the captaincy corresponded to the Santa Marta boat, registered in Pirapora, which disappeared in November 2008. The news reached the families by telephone 15 years later. Dona Iracema answered the call, sitting in the same plastic chair from the backyard. Oh, the caller was an investigator from the civil police of Minas Gerais who used careful words but who couldn't answer the only question she asked. And, the men, doctor, where are the men? The investigator didn't know the answer. Nobody knew. The Criminal Investigation Unit from Salvador sent a team to the site, which remained there for 3 days examining the boat. The preliminary report confirmed what the cowboys had already observed. There were no signs of violence, no human remains, and no bloodstains visible to the naked eye or under ultraviolet light. The hull structure was intact. The motor showed wear consistent with the exposure time, but did not exhibit mechanical damage that would indicate sudden failure. Samples of silt and sediment collected from the hull were sent for laboratory analysis, but the results did not provide any relevant information about the chronology or circumstances of the grounding. What the forensic experts failed to explain was the preservation of the personal belongings. 15 years of exposure to the climate of the bay and backlands. Intense sun, torrential rain, constant humidity should have destroyed cotton clothing, paper documents, and plastic objects. But the tarp covering the aft deck, although faded, had served as reasonable protection. And the boat's position, on a dead arm of the bank, partially covered by the canopy of a large fig tree, had created a kind of natural shade that reduced the direct incidence of the sun. Even so, the degree of preservation was unusual. The spiral notebook, with fishing notes, for example, had moldy pages, but they were more legible because Nivaldo's wallet was dried out, but more intact. The aluminum plates were rusted at the edges, but arranged in the same position in which they were found. The table setting was the detail that most intrigued the investigators. 7 plates, 7 forks, 7 spoons, 7 glasses, arranged in a circle as if for a shared meal, but without food, without leftovers, without any signs of use. The investigation raised 2 possibilities. Either the table was set for a meal that never happened, the men disappeared before eating, or the table was set afterward by someone as a kind of staged event. The second hypothesis was discarded due to lack of evidence and lack of reason. Who would do that, and why? The first hypothesis was the most logical, but also the most disturbing. If the men disappeared before the meal, what drove them off the boat, and why did they leave everything behind? Clothes, documents, money, personal belongings. People who flee take things with them. People who are kidnapped leave signs. People who fall into the water leave marks. People who die leave bodies behind. The 7 fishermen from Santa Marta left none of that behind. They left a set table and silence. News of the discovery spread through Pirapora in a matter of hours. Before the police issued any official statement, Mrs. Iracema's phone was already ringing non-stop. Neighbors, relatives, acquaintances. Everyone wanted to know if it was true, if they had found the boat, if they had found the men. Iracema repeated the same phrase to each person who called. They found the boat, but they didn't find anyone. The following week, Dona Conceição traveled to Bom Jesus de Lapa to see the boat with her own eyes. It took him almost 12 hours on the road from Pirapora, BR 135 to Montes Claros, then BR 251 to Salinas, then a state road to Bahia. Conceição went with her eldest grandson, Arlindo, a young man in his early 20s who was driving a borrowed Fiat Uno. They arrived at the location in the late afternoon, when the sun was already low, and the golden light of the Bahian backlands covered the river in a color that seemed from another time. The boat was still there, cordoned off with police tape. Conceição asked for permission to come aboard. The police officer on guard hesitated, but eventually allowed it. She climbed up onto the bow deck, holding onto the edge with both hands, and walked slowly to the stern. He saw the table set. He saw the plates. He saw the glasses turned upside down. She stood there for a long time, staring without speaking. The grandson stayed down on the bank, waiting, and when she came down, her eyes were dry, but her face had changed. Something inside him had hardened completely. She told her grandson inside the car, on the way back, that they were getting ready to eat. They were all together, and something came and took them away. I don't know what, but I know they didn't leave because they wanted to. The civil police of Minas Gerais reopened the original investigation after the boat was found. Further investigations have been requested. The civil police of Bahia shared the forensic material. The public prosecutor's office of Minas Gerais has appointed a prosecutor to follow the case, but the reopening didn't bring any new answers. I brought more questions. How did the boat travel more than 600 kilometers downstream without being seen by anyone? The Santa Marta River left Pirapora and appeared near Bom Jesus da Lapa, on a stretch of the São Francisco River that is in another state. Between these 2 points, the river passes through dozens of cities and riverside communities. It passes through São Romão, Januária, Manga, Itacarambi, Carinhanha, Serra do Ramalho, places where there are ports, where there are fishermen. We are always looking toward Saragua. A 12-meter boat painted blue and white, sailing downriver with or without a crew, should have been spotted by someone at some point, but no one saw it, or no one said they saw it. There was also the issue of navigation. If the men disappeared near Pirapora, as the circumstances suggested, the boat would have drifted 600 kilometers alone, without a crew. In theory, this was possible. The São Francisco River has long stretches of constant current, and a boat adrift could drift for days or weeks, even if pushed by the water. But a drifting boat hits things, runs aground on sandbanks, gets caught in vegetation, spins in backwaters, doesn't travel 600 kilometers in a clear line, and ends up stopped in a dead arm of the river, as if someone had guided it there. The alternative was that someone had actually guided the boat to that point. But who, and why, and where were the 7 men who were supposed to be on board? The final expert report was delivered in July 2023. It was 34 pages long and concluded with a sentence that summarized 15 years of silence. It was not possible to determine the causes and circumstances of the disappearance of the 7 crew members of the vessel Santa Marta. Nor is it clear what dynamics resulted in the vessel being located at the point where it was found. In Pirapora, the discovery of the boat brought no relief, but rather a new kind of pain. The pain of almost knowing, of getting close to the answer and finding another question, of seeing with one's own eyes the place where the men were, what the men touched, what the men prepared, and not knowing what came next. Dona Iracema got Tiao's wallet back. It was inside a sealed plastic bag with a protocol number stuck to the outside. She opened the bag on the kitchen table, took out her wallet, and held onto it for a long time. Inside were Tiao's ID card, his CPF, Brazilian tax identification number, a photo of the 2 of them, the same one from his 30th birthday, and a 20-real bill folded in 4. Iracema looked at the note and said, "For no one in particular." He always kept a note at the bottom of his wallet. He said it was in case he needed to get back home anyway. The note was there. Tiao wasn't. Dona Lucia received the news of the boat's discovery by phone on a Saturday morning, while hanging clothes on the clothesline in the back. Her eldest son, Sebastião, the one who had joined the merchant navy, was at sea and only found out 3 days later when the ship docked in Vitoria and he got a cell phone signal. He called his mother and they were silent for almost a minute before someone spoke. Sebastião said, "Mom, they found Grandpa's boat." Lucia said, "I know, my son." Sebastião asked, "And now?" Lucia replied, "Now nothing. Now it's the same as before, only worse." Dona Marlene, who by then had grown 4 children and worked as a kitchen assistant at a restaurant on BR 365, received the news through the family's WhatsApp group. He read the message, dropped his cell phone on the counter, and went to the staff restroom. He stayed there for 10 minutes. When she returned, her co-worker asked if everything was all right. Marlene said yes, that it was just dizziness. He didn't say anything. She didn't cry in front of anyone. She cried at home, at night, alone, as she had done since 2008. Dona Conceição was the only one who transformed her grief into action. After returning from Bom Jesus da Lapa, he sought out the regional press. He gave an interview to a TV station in Montes Claros and to an online newspaper in Pirapora. He told the story from beginning to end, showed the photos, showed the documents, showed the note he had left at the police station in 2009. We will continue searching with or without you. He requested that the case be truly reopened, but that someone explain how a boat disappears with 7 men and reappears 15 years later with the table set and no one on board. A blogger from Belo Horizonte compared the case to that of the Mary Celeste, the American ship found adrift in the Atlantic in 1872, intact, with the table set and no crew. The comparison was imperfect, but the image was powerful. A ghost ship on the San Francisco River with dishes laid out for a dinner that no one ate. The investigation remains open to this day. There are no suspects, no bodies, no official explanation. The families of the 7 fishermen continue to live in Pirapora and Montes Claros, carrying the weight of an absence that has no form and no end. The Santa Marta boat was seized by the River Port Authority and taken to a storage facility in Juazeiro, Bahia, where it remains as material evidence of a case that no one has been able to solve. The São Francisco River continues to flow, wide, slow, indifferent, passing through cities that sleep early and wake to the sound of the water, carrying sediment, carrying fish, carrying time, keeping what no one has found. Mrs. Iracema Botelho Reis turned 74 in October 2023. She continues to live in the same house. Tiao's bicycle is still leaning against the wall in the same spot. The front door lock remains unchanged. He continues to sit in the plastic chair in the backyard at night, staring towards the river that is not visible. Someone asked her after the boat was found if she now accepted that her husband wasn't coming back. She remained silent for a while, then said, "I don't accept anything. I just wait. It's the only thing I know how to do." The 20 reais bill that Tiao kept in his wallet to get home no matter what is now in the dresser drawer, along with the marriage certificate, documents, and the photo from his 30th birthday. The drawer is closed. The house is quiet. The river flows below as it did yesterday, as it will flow tomorrow. And the 7 aluminum plates arranged in a circle for a meal that never happened remain the last image anyone had of the 7 men from Santa Marta, sitting together, ready to eat, in a boat that the river carried away, and that time couldn't explain. Yeah,